thanks so much for waking up early with us. And, I'm glad to report as we kick it off that we have no issues that have been reported so far to us about opening the polls or any issues, as clerks are preparing for today. So that's great news as we head into the day. And as I continue saying, I really expect today to be a smooth day. I expect voters to have a good, safe experience at the polls. And I do want to just provide a couple of reminders for voters as they're headed to the polls, sort of what to expect, what to remember to bring as we all get prepared. So the first is to just talk about the mask requirement. So masks are required for poll workers and for observers. They are also recommended unanimously by our bipartisan commission for voters. But for voters, they're not required because you can't add an additional qualification to the constitutional right to vote. But they certainly are recommended for voters to wear, and many polling places will have additional masks available for someone that may not have one and need to be provided one. The second is that, just in general, polling places are prepared for both voter and worker health. So everything has been reconceptualized to make sure that voters and poll workers' health is front and center. So in Wisconsin, this will be our fourth statewide election in 2020. And Wisconsin election officials are prepared for election day. Our technology has been updated so that voters are able to track their absentee ballots, and our polling places are also ready in terms of having hand sanitizer that will be offered to every voter upon entering and leaving the polling places. Surfaces will be disinfected in accordance with public health guidance. And our poll workers have also been trained to incorporate public health guidance into every step of the process. So whether it's showing your photo ID, signing your name at the poll book, standing in line, every single aspect of the election has been conceptualized, and poll workers have been trained to keep voters and poll workers safe. There are also things like curbside voting available to voters. There's hospitalized elector voting for voters who are in the hospital or who are quarantined at home. And those are options available to folks today too, if they're not able to go to the polls or if they're not able to access the polls, they're able to use curbside as well. And so overall, our election officials, again, they're ready to deliver fair, accurate, safe, transparent elections to all voters who choose to vote at the polls today. And voters should really feel confident as they head to the polls today, knowing that their health and safety is a top priority. Next, if you haven't turned in your ballot yet, so if voters still have their absentee ballot, they're going to need to return those in person. And those ballots have to be returned by 8 p.m. today in order to be counted. So as we've been saying consistently throughout this year, that it can take up to a week for those ballots to be returned, and all ballots have to be back by 8 p.m. today. And so if somebody has not yet returned their ballot, they have two options. One is to drop it off in person. So find out where you can drop your ballot off in person for it to be counted by 8 in your local jurisdiction by going to myvote.wi.gov. And that's where you're going to find your local drop-off options specifically for election day, or contact information for your local election official to find out more about your community. But you can return that absentee ballot in person today. A voter could also choose to not vote their absentee ballot that was sent to them by mail and instead go to the polls on election day. You shouldn't, if you're going to vote an in-person ballot at the polls today, no reason to bring that absentee with you. If it's an unvoted absentee, don't bring that with you to the polls. You'll be issued a new ballot at the polling station today through the in-person process. But if you have a voted absentee that's already been signed and already been witnessed, then you can bring it back to your polls. In most communities, some communities, you're going to have to bring it to the central count location or to City Hall, but double check again on My Vote to see where you can return that. If you've already returned your absentee ballot, you cannot vote at the polls today on election day. So if you've already put that ballot in the mail, if you've already returned it, you are not eligible to receive a ballot today at the polls. Also, as voters prepare today, leave your political apparel at home. There's no electioneering allowed at the polls. And so I know a lot of voters feel very passionate about their candidates, but please leave your political apparel, materials, items at home or in your car when you go to vote. Electioneering, which is advocating or displaying support for a candidate on the ballot, is prohibited within 100 feet from the polling place. So please keep that in mind as you're getting ready for the polls today. And then, all voters need to provide a photo ID. So when you're voting in person at the polls, every voter has to provide a photo ID. And a couple of reminders about those IDs. So all voters have to show it, but it can be a number of different types of ID. So it can be a state of Wisconsin driver license or an ID card or one of those receipts for those products issued by the Wisconsin DMV. It can be a passport, a military ID, a tribal ID, a student ID, a veteran's health ID, and each of those has its own expiration date as well. So when the poll worker looks at your ID, they're looking for three things. The first is to make sure your name conforms with the name on the poll book. So if your name is Robert, but your photo ID says Rob, that's okay. If your photo ID says Sue, but the poll book says Susan, that's okay. But it needs to reasonably conform with the name in the poll book. Next, your photo has to reasonably resemble you. And in most cases, they'll be able to make that determination even if the voter has a mask on. But the poll worker may ask a voter to briefly remove their mask if they can't reasonably identify the voter from their picture on their photo ID. And then the third thing they're looking for is to make sure that it's unexpired or it expired since the appropriate deadline. And so for something like a Wisconsin driver license or state ID, it can actually be expired since November of 2018, and it can be still be used for voting in today's election. Another thing we hear often is that people think it has to have that star in the upper right hand corner that indicates a real ID. It does not need to have the star. So star or no star, you're good to go in terms of photo ID today. So again, make sure you've got your photo ID, make sure it's one of those acceptable photo IDs. You can check on myvote.wi.gov to learn more about photo ID. You can learn a whole lot more if you go to bringit.wi.gov. And if somebody does not have a photo ID, so if you don't have the photo ID you need to vote, you can still go to the polls and cast what's called a provisional ballot. So that is really the only option to get a provisional ballot is if you don't have the photo ID you need to vote. And so you can cast a provisional ballot, and then you could still go to the Wisconsin DMV and get a free ID for voting purposes. You can even apply and get one of those free IDs for voting if you don't have documents like a birth certificate or your social security card. You can still go to the DMV, get an ID for free using the ID petition process, which again, if you don't have those documents, you're still able to get something. And if you cast a provisional ballot, what you need to do then is bring back that free ID that you get from the DMV to your clerk's office by Friday at 4 o'clock, and your provisional ballot will still be counted. Next is, of course, the reminder to check My Vote before you go to your polls. So myvote.wi.gov is the State of Wisconsin Elections Commission official website. So it is the official data source of elections. And you can go there to answer your questions about voting. You can learn about absentee. You can check your voter registration, make sure that you're registered at the right address, that your information is up to date. You can also track your absentee ballot. You can find your polling place. You can view a sample ballot. Everything you need to do to get ready to head to the polls today, you can find out at myvote.wi.gov. So it's a really great place to start as you head out. It works well on mobile devices. So if you're already on your way to the polls, pull up My Vote and just make sure everything's good to go. If you need to register, you can also register to vote at the polls today. We have Election Day registration. And so what that means is that before you're going to be issued a ballot, you're going to have to register to vote. And to register to vote, you have to show a proof of residence document. So this is something separate than the photo ID process. Proof of residence, that could be, and again, this is only if you need to register, that could be your state of Wisconsin ID or driver license if it has your current address on it. But if it doesn't have your current address on it, you can show something else like a utility bill or a bank statement. And you can even show those proof of residence documents on your mobile device. You can show it electronically, it doesn't have to be in paper form. So, a couple of important reminders: check out myvote.wi.gov, make sure you're registered. If you need to register, you can do that at the polls today, but bring that proof of residence document along with you. And then my final, I guess, reminder as you head to the polls is be kind to your poll workers, be patient. It's a long day, and our poll workers and our clerks around the state, and we need more than 30,000 poll workers around the state to run today's election. They're working a long day, a very long day, and it's going to be, certainly a challenge. I know everybody had to wake up early, and we'll all be working late, and so be kind and be patient to one another as we head out there to the polls today. I expect, again, a smooth day. And I think voters should feel really confident as they head in today that if they go to the polls today, they will have a safe experience, that their vote will count. And they should feel really good about all the preparations that have been made by your local election officials, all the care that's been put into every one of the ballots that will be cast and counted today. It's really incredible. And I have nothing but extreme gratitude for our local election officials and all that they've done to prepare for today. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to all of you too. I mean, this is going to be a long day for all of you as well, but it is such an important, exciting day. So with that, I will open it up to any questions that you may have.
Sure. First is Pat Pobletti from WisPolitics.
Hi, Megan. Good morning, and thank you again for doing this. Could you give us an update on where those 400 National Guard troops ended up getting deployed to, and how many of those were deployed?
Yeah, so I don't have the breakdown specifically, but I know that we still have more than 200 that are in reserve, between 200 and 300 that are still in reserve. So as the morning progresses, and if somebody calls and says that they have a shortage, then we'll work with them to deploy people from that reserve. But we have other reserves too. So most of our counties and many of our municipalities put together their own reserve pools. So things like training county workers, training municipal workers from other departments to be poll workers. So if there's a shortage today, that's really their first line, is to go through that option. We also have a small pool of state employees too that have been trained and are ready to be deployed in the event of a shortage. But I know that as of this morning, we still have a reserve of between 200 and 300, but we continue to adjust as needed. Some places that said they had a need last night, today, they had poll workers that showed up. Other places may have had unexpected shortages. So, it's not a perfect number, and it's something that will change constantly throughout the day as needs arise through the day.
Thank you.
Next is Adam Brewster from CBS News.
Thanks, Megan, for doing this. As far as Outagamie County is concerned, have you heard from the county at all, or Calumet, about how they feel their staffing went to work on the duplicating process that they need to do for those ballots that had the printing error?
Yeah, so we've been in, continual contact with them to make sure that they feel like they have the resources they need as they head into today. And yes, I think overall they were feeling confident they were able to find enough poll workers to help with those additional remaking of ballots tonight. We also made sure that they had a pool of reserve National Guard in the event that one of their poll workers weren't available. So they continue to maintain a reserve in Outagamie County. We also have a reserve, that would be available later in the day in case there's some kind of shortage that's unexpected at the end of the day and they need assistance with helping to count those ballots. So I haven't heard that they are experiencing any trouble with staffing or expect any problems with being able to remake those ballots. But we continue to remain very prepared in the event that something unexpected happens.
Next is Alexa Corsa from from the Wall Street Journal.
Hi, Meagan. Thanks for doing this so early, or maybe not early. Maybe you've been up for a while. For the National Guard members, do you have? Are they only doing like poll worker type stuff, or have you coordinated with any in terms of preparing for possible protest or civil unrest?
Yeah, the National Guard is just, in terms of elections, they're just there to serve as poll workers. And many of them are serving just in roles like helping with hand sanitation, making sure that surfaces are disinfected, all those really important roles. But they are not there for crowd control. They are not there for any sort of law enforcement capacity. They are poll workers. And so that has been made very clear to all of our local election officials that they need to continue to utilize their contingency plans in the event that there is any type of disturbance at their polling place. Our local election officials are ready to contact their local law enforcement and engage that process. But our National Guard, again, they're just serving in their own capacity in civilian clothing in their home communities. So these are our voters, neighbors, friends, and families that are really just serving in the event that somebody is not able to serve this morning, that they're able to step in those poll worker and those helper roles at the polling place.
All right, any more questions? Raise your hands if you've got anything. Caroline Kenny.
Hi there, good morning. Do you guys have an update on the absentee ballots returned yet for today, or will that be up a little bit later?
Good question. It comes through at
Uh,
7:30, right, Reed?
Yep, the system generates it at 7:30, so we'll be posting it shortly thereafter.
Okay, great. Thank you guys.
Next is Cheyenne Hazlett.
Hi, Megan. Thank you for doing this, and thank you, Reed. Do you have any indication of how many ballots you might expect to see coming in today, and how that could overwhelm clerks at all as they're processing, the ballots that have already come in, as well as any late arrivals?
Yeah, so I know that our polling places are prepared for that. So we saw in August some new voter behavior for our state, which was that voters received their ballot by mail, but returned it to the polls on election day or to their central count facility. And so I know many of our jurisdictions have prepared for that, that they would have the capacity to be able to receive those ballots and get them processed with the rest quickly. Now, over 91% of the absentee ballots that have been sent have been returned. So there's not a huge pool left to be returned. But that being said, they are still prepared for the fact that voters may return their absentee ballots today. And no, I don't have any reason to believe that that would overwhelm the system. I think that they have prepared for that because that is the voter behavior that we've seen this year in other elections.
Do you
just
have
to-
any idea, sorry, Reed, any estimate on counting rate, or is that something that really can only be established by the counties, the county
Yeah,
clerks?
that really actually only the municipalities, because each of our city, town, and village clerks is the one responsible for training and running their polling places. And they all have different voting equipment. They all have different volumes of absentee in terms of what they're processing. So, processing can take different amounts of time in different communities, depending on the volume, depending on the type of equipment that they have. So it's really not a estimates that we can give, statewide. But individual communities, they've been practicing this heading up to election day as they do their required voting equipment tests. They also do estimates to try to understand how long it will take them to process ballots. In the case of Outagamie County, I know they've done some calculations to figure out how long it will take them to remake those ballots as well. And so those are calculations each of our communities is doing depending on the resources and equipment that they have available.
Just to add, 24 hours ago, there were approximately 175,000 ballots that had not been returned yet. We'll see what the number is in 10 minutes. Next is, looks like Adam Brewster has another question.
Thanks, Megan. I was just wondering about, as far as same-day registration goes, are there many eligible voters left that you guys are even aware of who could register today? I know you guys have a really high number of people who are already registered. Just how that's gone in the past and whether there's even a large number still out there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and there's approximately 4.2 million eligible voters in the state of Wisconsin, and we have just under 3 million registrations. So yeah, there certainly is a pool of people that could register to vote on election day. That's always, it's hard to make predictions in an election day registration state about turnout and things because you don't have a solidified pool of voters, right? There's still other eligible voters that might choose to participate on election day. But I guess we'll see. I don't really know what election day registration will look like today, but I know that we're a state where historically a lot of people register to vote on election day. Now, we've seen throughout this year a bit of a shift to the online voter registration during that time period, but election day registration is always a pretty big deal in our states. And, the majority of records that have been created in our system were created through election day registration. So I guess we'll see what the day brings, but our poll workers again are prepared for that volume. So I think even if there aren't a ton of election day registrations, they're prepared for the event that there are a lot of election day registrations.
And we are at 3.68 million registered voters as of November 1st.
Okay, so the smaller pool left.
But still, a lot of people who come in and do it also are, when they register on election day, they're updating their information if they've moved or they've changed their names too. So
that's a good point. Yeah, election day registration is not just new voters; it's voters that have to make an update to their record.